high extent of guilt, and as supported by a highly required evidence beyond reasonable doubt. So any version to deny the criminal conviction of victims, a criminal conviction of suspect, would fail the prosecution case. So the kind of institution and spirit that long been practiced in Korean context, that was criticized in face with increasing social injustice about victims' rights. So imagine if the criminals would work freely on public street, who perpetrated sexual crime. However, the victims would suffer mentally, or the families may be deprived, and in some cases dissolved. So this harsh reality could no longer be sustained in our national sense of justice. So the public morale and also the legislative initiative pursued to restore some new dimension of social justice between criminals and criminal victims. So it is now urgent to safeguard the interests of a criminal victims. So the decree, the rules enacted by DOJ require the scope of necessities to be provisional in the interest of a criminal victims. That concept would come in conflict with the administrative state. It is the duty of state to preserve the interest of public addresses, policy addresses. So how do you consider the goodness of this policy? Public good is the ultimate goal the public agencies are to pursue. So it is the statutory duty that the KPO would offer the information about parole or surveillance status of the criminals. So in some cases, they fear of revenge. So is the parole system properly operating to alienate criminals from danger, potential danger? And the sexual victims also develop some a disinterest and disappointment about criminal proceedings. So they would be reluctant to offer testimony in criminal proceedings, and concerns would go away, and they would not like to recall upon that misfortune, and which might increase his or suffers. However, the mental assistance from professionals, for example, rehabilitation expert, who is a clinical psychologist, they would collaborate with public prosecutors in aiding criminal victims. So they could construct their new lives by participating in criminal proceedings and process. So it is a duty to give information about the date of court law and also the sentences rendered against the victims. So information about the criminal case and many others could be constructively exchanged. And that it could be the basis to build up a new lives and cure a post-criminal trauma. And importantly, the Secretary of Department of Justice could institute the legal clinic that should be operated in a legal person, so legal corporations about a medical program or a psychic diagnosis and kind of a mental context of a medical engagement or pursuit. And also they could afford subsidies and financial assistance in compensation for their collaboration. So now the society is science-based, actually. The public agencies act on information. The professional assistance is essential to cure the evils in root pages. So, the relations between the administrative law and rulemaking is symbiotic indeed to structure the public lives of citizens as well as the politicians and bureaucrats. The administrative law could be broadly defined to encompass the statute, judgment laws, and agency laws. That could be a summary about my lengthy discussion in this class. Let me further on the summary. In this purview, the administrative law epidemiologically includes the rules of various nomenclature issued by the executive authorities, such as order, decree, rules, regulations, and ordinances. In a narrow sense, perhaps more friendly to the intellectuals, the administrative law is designed as the statutes of Congress enacted in compliance with constitutional and other statutory or internal requirements of House and Senate. So we have types of rules, actually. From this viewpoint, two sources of law can be distinguished in terms of lawmaking authority. Foundation of legal effect, scope and quality as a norm, and practical dynamism through the final addresses of norm or public policy. The administrative law springs from the congressional resolution, a political expression of public issues. So we contemplated our classes why administrative law when we discuss the law and public policy. My statement could reveal a core aspect, hopefully, about the question. In the US, the statutes in the scope are limited, and most typically are used to one statute called APA, dealing with the nature of procedural matters. The context of various countries. Consider how the tradition of APA could influence other countries. Let us see the Korean context. South Korea and perhaps a number of civil law countries are provided with the scope of statutes of general and specific public issues, including the Administrative Litigation Act, the Administrative Hearing Act on cases and controversies, and Administrative Surrogate Enforcement Act, and titles of public laws on the national economy, culture, public health, and environment. Often, this relative abundance of public statute in these countries fuel a source of contention and disagreement in the international community about the trade liberalization. In comparison, we can know the scope of rules in times of history and through the contemporary government of the US, which rivals in number and scope of public intervention. I might say previous class, so we can see some tendency in the wake of US administrative history. This implies the substance of law and public policy now exists and is being enforced as less differently between both traditions of law, despite the differences in formality. In this context, the role of administrative law and rule-making could be made distinct between two traditions. The administrative law took place most significantly in the civil law countries, while the rule-making of agencies would make a practically more important impact in the US. There could exist many potentials of extrapolation about this subtlety. One reason might arise if the United States practices a federal system and its government operates within the structure of three separate branches. Obvious strengths of rulemaking lies in its speed, efficacy with expertise, and bureaucratic experience, compact procedure, non-political and subject-scale directness. The small and unitary system of government could fully exploit these advantages without any legal hurdles and encumbrances. This context may well be void under the federal system and cost the century-long lessons of history for the US case. Take the example in the course materials about the Department of Interior in the early years of rulemaking history. It perhaps would be confused with the rule of Home Ministry in the UK, which has a plenary power to regulate under the delegation of power. Actually, under the federal system and dual sovereignty between the federal and state governments, this role could effectively be abridged to the limited scope of its intrinsic law within the constitutional structure. This can be cast in other highlight about the foundation of federal union, where the new wealthy class distrust with the strong government and less regulation or intervention or prefer to protect the wealth and interest. So I once said a Brownlow committee and FDR's response had its fourth branch, it should have gone forward. It needs few more, I suppose. It should not have gone thus far. However, it is a phenomenon. The federal system would pose puzzles or some difficulties about legitimate response involving many difficult public agenda contentions. This would be a cost payable to redress the repercussion from the feudal or arbitrary rule in the early ages. Concern arose and fomented to restore the social justice, while the integration of powers of national government has steadily expanded through the late of 20th century. So 1970s may be implicated to diverge this tendency in a more strong sense. And as I've said, regularity and predictability as provided by 1946 APA would be highlighted in terms of law and public policy. So the roles of rulemaking in public policy making are enormous in contemporary times. And historical survey informed the trend in inception to the end of last century. And we can arrive at the conclusion that the law of administrative law can be found in its paternal play for the rulemaking. And we consider the APA provision, well, Rule means the whole or part of an agency's statement of general or particular applicability and future effect designed to implement, interpret, or prescribe law or policy. It grounds the claim that the agencies execute their powers and duties. As the Constitution binds, the President has the duty to faithfully execute the law. The scope of constitutional powers, other than this, will prescribe in the Constitution. Nonetheless, execution of laws are one of traditional intrinsic historically and within the modern practice of the constitutional state. Because of the strict hold with the separation of powers principle, the kind of emergent powers will not operate within the U.S. Constitution, although the presidency of the U.S. often are attributed as modern replacement of feudal king. The context would be in comparison with civil law traditions. So take a look at the Weimar Constitution, for example, how the emergent power of presidents might be placed in chapters, and how did it distort the constitutional practice in aid with the advent of dictatorship. Hitler, and you will have some comparative viewpoint also with the Korean Constitution. What role and impact could be both in the 1970s Constitution, Korean Constitution, and 1980s. Since the laws are the product of institution constitutionally created, they could not negate the mandate of Constitution as a matter of nature. This logic can be applied to the relations between the APA and executive rules. So, also direct comment to be scarce in United context of legal sources. However, we may be based on the higher law concept, some hierarchy between different types of norms. So that would be basic to understand the law and public policy. Any questions or the class would be prolonged or had been prolonged? I would like to pass the promised time. Okay, any questions? Then that will be all for this class. I'll see you in the next class. Thank you for your attention. Yeah.